Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode in my series on the lore of the Witcher world. The last time we looked at Berserkers, but today I wanted to talk about, personally, one of my favourite characters from The Witcher 2, which is the Blue Stripe Commander, Vernon Roche, who is somebody who obviously needs no introduction yet again, but if any of you don't know the full story of his character, then, well, you're about to find out. Now, whereas he does play a much larger role in The Witcher 2, he still does come into The Witcher 3 and his story is very interesting. I've tried to organise the video as best as possible, meaning we'll start at the very beginning of his story and end with where he stands in The Witcher 3. This means I won't pace it in order of the games, but more of just like in the order of his life from childhood to adulthood. And I just want to say that I'm not going to go too far into the events of what happens to him in The Witcher 3, because I've tried to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, so I'm just going to very generally speak about events rather than go into great detail. Vernon grew up very poor, just like many others from the time and location of his birth. They lived in the slums to a major city, or at least I can assume it was a major city because that seems to be what most sources tend to point to, and his mother was forced into prostitution due to their circumstances. Unfortunately, Roche never knew his father, learning what he does know of life and the world through his mother alone. Growing up as poor as they were, it gave him a very bleak outlook on life, and it gave him what I can kind of assume was a need and a want to make the world a better place, no matter the cost. And that is not a better place in the terms of, generally speaking, what is the best thing to do, but generally speaking, he wants to make the world a better place inside of his own mind, and doing what he thought was best, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the most moral of choices. It's never mentioned when his mother passed away or what their relationship was really like, but I can only imagine they must have been very close, seeing as he was a fatherless child, and, well, she was the only one he had to cling on to. If anything, it would have been a very sad story, I imagine, and he probably saw a lot of shit when he was a kid. Due to his mother's profession, it led to many children calling him the son of a whore, or whoreson for short, and since growing up with that and knowing his mother only did what she had to do in order to provide for them both, he bears this insult with particular disdain and will let anyone know that he doesn't like being called that, for obvious reasons.
You know I didn't, but you need to prove a point. Sons of whores like you would rather hang an innocent man than admit failure.
Don't ever call me a whore's son again.
As he grew older, not much in his life really changed. He admitted himself that if it wasn't for a certain man, he may have just been left in the slums, or may have become a beggar or a vagabond, which basically means just a wanderer. And the man in question that actually technically saved his life was the king, in fact, the king named King Foltest. Now, from what I understand, Roche met the king not long after joining a Redanian military group known as the Blue Stripes. They were, and still are, an elite special force of warriors. He served with this unit for about 4 years, and for his devotion and bravery was awarded various medals. Additionally, he also became close friends with many of the Blue Stripe members, and became highly respected inside of the group, and they were the men that would trust their life to him. Although they of course have their faults, which fall mostly on a level of morality, since Blue Stripes were often referred to as racist elven slaughterers. But then again, those words are coming from the mouths of their worst enemies. Whether true or not, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt. Vernon was renowned especially for battling the Scoia'tael and quelling many rebellious non-human communities, and it was under his very command that the unit of the Blue Stripes rose to such fame and infamy. Once recognised for his service and devotion to Temeria, King Foltest took a liking to Roche and soon after made him his right-hand man, which led to him having a great deal of power and influence inside of Vizima especially. Roche's loyalty to Foltest ran very deep, and there is a journal entry from The Witcher 2 which gives you a pretty good idea of their relationship, and it reads as follows. There is a man like Vernon Roche in every monarch's entourage, okay. There is a man like Vernon Roche in every monarch's entourage, brave and determined, ready to execute any command, and thoroughly hated at court. He knows that only allegiance and service to the king keep him in his position. Vernon earned Foltest's favour and trust through his deeds. One word from the king and he would jump headlong into fire, asking only how long he was to stay there and hold his ground. That's the kind of man that Vernon Roche was at the time. Which, like I said, it explains a lot to his devotion to Foltest pretty accurately. He also learned to never believe the first thing you heard and to keep searching for the truth if your gut tells you to. Obviously this applies a lot to the events in The Witcher 2, where he helped track down the killer to his king and friend, Foltest. I won't go into too many details as I said before, but he basically helps to uncover a massive plot that led to the invasion of Nilfgaard and the war that currently ravages the north. In the immediate aftermath of the events of The Witcher 2, Vernon Roche raced out to the front line and joined the 2nd Termerian army, holding a defensive position on the Dol Blathana Mount Carbon line in preparation for the incoming Nilfgaardian invasion. However, after 3 days, the Nilfgaardian soldiers broke through their lines and the Termerians scattered. Upon hearing of King Radovid's call to arms near Novigrad and promises to fight for a free north, Roche took the remaining forces he had and fought through the west, breaking into the Pontar Delta in hopes of attracting Redanian support. Alas, to his despair, Radovid was no different from Emperor Emir, and thus he turned to guerrilla warfare, aka he took matters into his own hands. Still wanting to secure a free Temeria, he struck up an alliance with 2 former spy masters, one from Redania and the second from Temeria. The group secretly conversed with Nilfgaardian messengers to report back to Emir, with the Emperor promising to recognise Temeria as a vassal state to Nilfgaard, while the rest of the north would be swallowed up by the Empire if the group could help him win the war. And just to kind of break that down to you quickly, in the medieval times you'd have a vassal state or a vassal country, which basically meant they weren't annexed, I don't think in the same sense, but they were they still retained their traditions and the way they had and the way they'd done things for many years in terms of like their religions and the way they would act, and as if they were still there, but they would be technically a part of the Nilfgaardian Empire, but they would still be recognized as their own country at the same time. And this was the deal they struck up, so that they would remain as their own little country even if the rest of the north didn't. So it was a very selfish deal in that sense of the word, because obviously they didn't do anything for the rest of the north, but then again, this is the kind of situation where it's every man for himself, and knowing what kind of a patriot that Vernon Roche is, it kind of makes sense that he would make this kind of decision. Thus, Roche and his men undermined Redanian support in the area while not attacking Nilfgaardian troops. Likewise, Nilfgaardian troops were also ordered to leave the guerrilla soldiers be, supposedly under the pretext that they weren't much of a threat anymore. And the outcome of his actions, be they for better or worse, you either know already or you will have to find out for yourself, because inside of The Witcher 3 it can lead to a lot of different outcomes depending on what you choose and who you side with and all of that malarkey. And in the end, it's kind of funny because Vernon is a very human character and oddly relatable and admirable for his loyalty. Whether it's in the right place or not is another question entirely, but that's all subjective to people's different beliefs and opinions. Love him or hate him, he does what he thinks is right, often at the high cost to himself for the freedom of others and Temeria. And he's one of the characters that I always liked in The Witcher 2, because even though he was a hard ass and he was, obviously completely numb to a lot of things that I'd seen and a lot of different situations he'd been in, he still had this kind of sense of that he really wanted to make the right decisions and he really would go to any lengths to do it, to do what he thought was right. And I know that doesn't make him any better in terms of what morality he has, but he's a bit like Lambert in the way where you can feel that his emotions and the way he acts gets, it's really human. You can understand where he's coming from, you can understand what he's trying to say. And that was one of the things about The Witcher 2, because there's a conflict between Euroveth and Roche. You can understand both their sides and you can understand why they were both fighting for what they were, and again it all comes down to the lesser of two evils, which is really awesome because it's one of those things that really makes you think about your decisions. It really makes you wonder what's right and what's wrong, and it really makes you care about the characters because you're immediately put into a situation where you have to. You're put into a situation where you need to think about what you're saying, you need to think about what you're doing, and you need to think about who's right and who's wrong and what's better for everyone in the long term. As always everyone, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video then please leave a like down below, and if you'd like to support me in any way then buy me a cup of coffee on Patreon or something, and a massive thank you to everyone who is currently supporting me, and seeing as how we've hit 10,000 subscribers recently, it's insane and wonderful. And I'm not too sure how we'll celebrate exactly, but if you guys want to do like a Q&A or anything, you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, then by all means leave them down in the comments below. I'll answer them in the next video for you guys. For now, just thank you, and until the next one, this has been OK Gov Bear, and you'll go and have a very, very wonderful day. Bloomers.